1994 San Francisco Pride Parade that depicts a group of trans men marching in a parade with a sign made by Lauren Cameron that reads FTM Trans Pride. In the front row from left to right, you have Max Wolf-Valerio, Matt Rice, David Harrison, Lauren Cameron, and an unknown person on the right. In the back row from left to right, there's Susan Stryker holding her baby, Bryn Caffrey, and Stephen Thorne. This photo was by David Harrison. There is no intro to this video. I tried to write an intro, and I just don't have a neat summation of what I'm going to be talking about here. These are just notes towards something. They're not the thing itself. I don't even really feel qualified to say what trans masc sexuality is, even after all of these conversations and all of this research. It's really just not one thing. It's so many things. So I just talked to some guys, looked in some archives, and this is what I found. Think of it as like a guided museum tour by your brother's gay friend who only wears backward hats and cut-off shirts. Partly, the reason I felt like I needed to do this was this tweet exchange about gay trans men's experience in which not a single gay trans man was featured. This photo is by Katie Montgomery, so you can see that there's a cis woman who says, "The easiest shag a straight man can find today is from a trans man who thinks they are gay." At Lucy, at Tech LGBT on Twitter, my favorite type of Twitter user, people who pretend they've moved to Mastodon, says, "That's a pretty weird thing to choose to say." And then the original poster responds back, "I've seen the straight blokes talk about it online. They just sign up to a gay dating app, find the women on there, and pretend to be gay until they get what they want." And so Katie Montgomery has helpfully, well-intentionally said, "Nah, mate, I'm just going to Grindr to pick up straight women. It's not gay." And then the straight women, in quotation marks, that she's pictured are 3 trans masc models who are very conventionally attractive. This is a pretty common misconception, and one that even we dudes sometimes engage in. Like, I'm not here to pick on the ladies. Definitely no shade to Katie Montgomery at all, or really like anyone who tries to make this argument in good faith in defense of trans guys. But it's actually not helpful to us. I made a whole post about it, and like, you can read it if you want. You just like pause it, whatever. But also just fucking watch the video. So another place that I started was this interview with Hanmi, a queer Korean trans man.
그러니까 저 사람이 FTM일 거라고 상상할 수조차 없는 사회인 거죠. 그게 있는지 모르는 사회. 그래서 사실 사회적으로, 그러니까 LGBTQ 이 바닥을 떠난 다른 사회에서는 사실 아무도 모르죠, 제가 FTM인 거. 현재 지금 직장 생활도 그냥 바이오 남성을 하고, 일반 남성을 하고 있고, 어찌됐든 간 저는 일을 하고 있는 게 전문 기술직에 있거든요. IT 쪽에 네트워크 엔지니어링을 하고 있는데, 그냥 누구에게도 커밍아웃 하지 않고, 커밍아웃 할 수도 없고, 그렇게 그냥 생활을 하고, 대부분의 많은 FTM들이 아마 그렇게 생활하고 있어요.
한국에서는 왜 이게 전혀 밖으로 드러나지 않고 계속 이렇게 숨어 있어야만 했던 그 이유는 어떤 거라고 생각하세요?
일단 첫 번째 이유는 사실 드러날 필요가 없어요. 왜냐면 일정 정도 치료를 진행한 FTM이라면, 치료를 진행하고 있는 트랜스맨이라면 외관상 드러나는 외모는 사실 아무도 의심할 수 없게 남성으로 계속 패싱이 되니까 드러날 필요가 없는데, 드러날 필요가 없다고 느껴지는 건 사실 드러나는 순간 시작되는, 그러니까 트랜스 했다는 그 사실 자체에서 시작되는 차별들이 분명히 존재하거든요. 근데 저 사람이 나를 남성으로 인식했다가 나 FTM이야, 나 트랜스맨이야 라고 설명했을 때, 그걸 모를 뿐더러 그걸 알게 되는 순간 저 사람은 끊임없이 나의 성별을 의심할 거거든요. 저 사람은 결국 여자구나 라고 인식이 될 거고, 거기서 시작하는 많은 차별들이 있고, 또 거기서 시작되는 나의 부딪힘들이 있고, 내 고통들이 있고. 우리나라는 구분을 못해요. 그러니까 트랜스젠더와 게이를 구분을 못해요. 그러니까 게이? MTF, FTM? 레즈비언. 이게 그러니까 아직 그 형성이 안 돼 있는 거예요.
지금
FTM들이 굉장히 마초적이에요. 그러니까 남성성과 여성성을 나누고, 그러니까 FTM 내가 남성이기 때문에 남성성에 나를 맞춰야 된다는 그 근거에 굉장히 강해요. 그러니까 한국어에 재밌는 말이 있잖아요. 어머. 근데 제가 습관적으로 어머를 많이 쓰거든요. 근데 이 어머라는 말이 굉장히 여성적인 말이랑 여자들만 쓰는 말이라고 생각을 한단 말인데, 아주 일례로 듣는 거지만, 내가 FTM 커뮤니티 가서 뭐 이렇게 하다가 이렇게 컵을 잡고 마시다가 이렇게 뭘 떨어뜨렸어요. 어머! 이러면 야 무슨 사내 새끼가 씨 이렇게 되는 게 있는 거죠. 근데 알아요 제가 여성적인 걸 그러니까 지금 현재 와서는 제가 여성적인 걸 아는데 사실 저도 마초의 시기들을 거쳤어요. 왜냐면 아까도 얘기했지만 살면서 아무도 내가 왜 남성인가 여성인가를 생각하지 않는단 말이죠. 근데 나는 내가 남성인 이유를 끊임없이 설명을 해야 돼요. 너 왜 남자니? 너 여자 왜 남자가 됐니? 왜 남자가 되고 싶니? 그러면 사실 누가 알아요? 왜 여잔지 아세요? 왜 여잔지 아세요? 왜 남자인지 아세요? 아무도 모르거든요. 저를 어떻게 알아요? 내가 남자인데. 근데 사실 나는 이걸 끊임없이 설명해야 되는 상황들에 부딪히는 거예요. 그렇다 보니까 내가 남성임을 설명할 수 있는 근거 혹은 여성임을 설명할 수 있는 근거는 사실 아무도 가지고 있지 않은데 나는 그걸 해야 되니까 그걸 만들어낼 수 있는 가장 좋은 방법은 내 남성성을 과시하는 거였어요. 그렇기 때문에 뭐 이렇게 제스처라든가 뭐지 아주 우악스러운 것들 있잖아요. 말투도 뭐 옛날에는 뭐 입에 욕을 달고 있다가 야이씨 막 그러면 아니면 이런 막 인상 쓰고 막 머리 이렇게 빼고 넘기고 다니는 거지. 그런 남성 흔히 말하는 소위 과시화된 남성성이라고 하는 마초들이 하는 그거를 했었죠 저도. 근데 말이 안 되는 거잖아요 사실은. 그래서 이제 그런 변화를 저도 스스로 제 스스로 겪어왔고 사실 그건 일정 정도 치료를 시작하고 내가 남성인 내가 자연스러워졌을 때 그러니까 사회적으로 남성인 내가 사실 내가 그러니까 지금에 와서는 종종 까먹어요. 내가 FTM인 걸 까먹어요. 그러니까 오히려 지금은 내가 게이로서의 고민이 너무 많다 보니까 FTM이고 게이이고 그 사회의 그 커뮤니티 안에서 그러니까 그 사회 안에서 있는 그 정체성에 대한 고민이 더 크기 때문에 FTM 커뮤니티에서 내가 속할 수 있다는 소속감은 사실 거의 없죠. 왜냐면 그들은 너무 마초적이고 나한테 끊임없이 남성적인 걸 요구하고 나는 그렇지 않은데 나는 요리도 좋아하고 청소하는 것도 좋아하고 흔히 말하는 소위 여성적이라고 하는 것들을 좋아하는데 근데 그것도 여성적인 것도 아닌데 사실 그게 난 건데 끊임없이 그 스트레스 그리고 나를 자꾸 의심하는 것들 왜 특히 한국 사회 FTM 커뮤니티 가서 소문이 돌잖아요. 한무지 게이라 한무지 남자 만나더라. 그럼 걔 남자는 그거 수술한 거 후회하는 거야? 걔 여자야? 그게 모르는 거예요. 남성인 내가 남성을 좋아한다는 거가. 그러니까 오히려 트랜스 사회에서 호모포비아가 있는 거고 또 동성애 사회에 가보면 트랜스포비아가 또 있어요. 그러니까 사실 그러니까 LG, B하고 T는 너무 떨어져 있었던 역사들이 있던 거죠. 한국 사회에서 각각의 운동이 따로 진행되어 왔으니까.
What I got out of this is that I want to reveal the sexuality of queer trans men, particularly because the ways that we're discriminated against and endangered are deeply hidden within layers of homophobia and misogyny that exist in our society. So quick content warning for sexual assault and gay bashing in this upcoming quote that I'm going to show and read. So skip forward about a minute if you don't want to hear it. This is from FTN magazine from 1997. So there I was, no longer a 42D. Now I was a 42 regular. No guys staring at my chests, no jokes about the cold, nipply weather outside. Now I was a regular guy. So this was male privilege. I was almost giddy with the joy of invisibility. Now I wouldn't have to worry about being raped, a terror I'd endured upon 3 separate occasions. However, sometimes invisibility has its own price. Sure, I was no longer a fuck object in the minds of these regular guys. I was certainly invisible in that regard. But I began to notice a different scrutiny coming my way from these manly men. I was being fag-scanned. I was being observed for any telltale effeminate behaviors. Great! I've traded the fear of being raped for the fear of being gay-bashed. I don't really care if anybody reads me as gay. I am bisexual and have spent most of my life in the queer community, so I'm sure that I have queer vibes pouring from every pore of my body. Big deal. Yet, in all my years as a dyke, even after being gang raped in 1974, sorry, after being gang raped in 1974 for being a dyke, I had never felt such a real threat to my personal safety as I did in that bar after realizing how my invisibility as a trans man put me at risk. I coughed, cleared my throat in my most masculine fashion, and walked away with my best John Wayne swagger. Although, what could be more gay appearing than that? Walk like you got a pair as big as cantaloupes, I always say.
So, again, until 2016, the idea of trans masculinity and sexuality intersecting in any way at all was just not in my mind. And to be fair, I was so new to transness as a concept that, like, if you said the word transmasculine, I probably wouldn't have known what it was. After 2016. So just timeline-wise, I graduated. I had to move back to my hometown because of lack of money, unfortunately. And then I started working at a public library. During that time, I wound up checking out a lot, just pretty much as many books as I could find in the Michigan Electronic Library Network as possible, related to transness and, when possible, transmasculinity. And some of these would also show depictions of trans guys in sexual situations. And I want to make it clear that of these, most of them were written by transmasculine people. So this isn't just, cis people writing, tragedy porn. It was very much like real depictions of their own lives. A lot of them were more likely to talk about sex in the context of being sexually abused than sex in the context of, again, agency or wanting to have sex, consent, etc. And again, incredibly important works, all of which were tell very important stories. And simultaneously, I think sort of because that was all I was able to see, I felt like I started internalizing this view again of like, if a trans man is having sex, it's more likely because he's being forced to than because he wants to, which isn't a healthy mentality.
So in this video, I don't want to cover the ground I addressed in my Oron video, but I do want to delve further into the idea of trans men's sexuality, how it goes unaddressed, how we can find authentic ways to express who and what we are. For that reason, I'm going to try not to talk about chasers. If you're interested in that, go watch the Oron video. I will, however, let my interviewees say a few words.
But the cruising experiences I have had, run the gamut, basically. I haven't had any terrible. Like, I try my best to screen for weirdos as soon as they come up in my, DMs. Like, obviously no straight men, no married men. Anyone who is even remotely a chaser, I block immediately. Though some guys have slipped through the cracks where they're like, they seem cool in chat, but then when we get to doing it, later during pillow talk, they'll be like, "Oh, do you want my baby?" I'm like, what the fuck, dude? Like shit like that.
So you mentioned in sort of your entree into cruising that you definitely felt very cautious to avoid people who were straight men or chasers. I guess I would say what did that look like for you, and were those two distinct groups?
I can't really say, because maybe not. Definitely not. They were kind of a homogenous, kind of like a Venn diagram of, I would say, because the tranny chasers, to exclude the term, here, they usually go after trans women. So they usually think even though I specifically stated in my bio, I'm a trans man, but they're still like, hey, I love trans girls, and I'm like, block, no, absolutely. But also they're just the straight guys who want a fuck buddy, like the sides, that whole thing, usually it's it's either a straight guy bio or discreet, those kinds of guys.
Yeah.
They usually bring up the pussy stuff
Right away.
hey, let me come in your pussy, some stuff and shit like that, and I'm like,
Thank you
like
for
that.
coming with the receipts immediately. This man didn't even start with red flags. He just came with all the receipts. He's like, here you go.
Basically.
Here it is. Yeah.
There's of course people on Grindr who've got, their profiles, who are older men searching for younger transmasculine people, and then they'll have I prefer people to be unshaved and yada yada yada, and I want transmasculine people that I date to be these petite twinks, and sort of a fetishization of our bodies, where of course they want us to have top surgery, but preferably not bottom surgery because they're interested in experimenting. And then I've had queer women who have sort of fetishized me as this ability to be this sort of ideal butch that's, you know, completely masculine, but also completely respectable and stand it down, who, you know, can do all these things for you, and ask for nothing in return.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, in both of those cases, they're sort of like roles as a sexual object. Just like, one of them is like a sexual object who puts in a little more effort.
Yeah. Where it's, and it's sort of like they're both sort of like a reverse of each other, interestingly, where queer men will see you as a sexual object that is submissive and that they can just put their dick in, and queer women will see you as this object that can provide pleasure without asking for pleasure in return, who can be dominating but not seeking their own orgasm.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to, like, if you do seek that, then it's a sign of your being, like, tainted, or like being evil in some way, because it's seen as predatory.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that, like, I'm not putting a stigmatization on, you know, pillow princesses or high femmes, stone butches. I'm stone butch myself. But it's when it's not these, it's when they're sort of just like this assumption, right? Or when it's not really roles that people are playing into, but a demand.
Yeah. So I'm writing this shortly after Trans Day of Visibility and filming during Pride Month, in the middle of a trans genocide and renewed moral panic about trans people. I'm not sure that what I want out of this is visibility exactly. To be honest, I feel kind of gross and weird about visibility. It feels like being bought and then slowly having the parts of ourselves be sold back to us. What is visibility when the more they see us, the more they hate us? When being seen makes us targets? When our freedoms can be taken away at any time, and even that visibility is conditional on other people being down with it. However, I also see that who we are as dudes is not understood. I guess I feel like what isn't understood by people, even some of the ladies, is something that could reveal, explain another contour of the dark planet of gender. What does it feel to have sex as a man who was once a woman, who's sometimes still seen as a woman?
The general, like, TLDR conclusion that I had in my head, which might not be 100% true, but I don't know, is that we're seen in one of two ways. Either we're seen as a cis girl about to make the worst mistake of her entire life by taking her body away from cis people who are attracted to it, who must be stopped at all costs and are, of course, not smart enough to know better. Or after the fact, after we've, you know, irreversibly damaged, if you will, after we've done the deed, or whatever series of deeds it will be, differs for everybody, then we're just this thing that they're no longer attracted to, but also not really deserving of dignity either. It's like we're not really seen as men unless our transness was not known in the first place. It's just something different, not really male, not really sexual, not really female anymore, I guess. I don't think they really see us quite the same way after we've moved forward with some kind of gender affirmation or another, but I don't know. At no phase in the process do I think we're really seen as male. And I think it is important because I think for a lot of cis people, in their mind, like a sexual actor, somebody who has agency in sex and wants sex and initiates sex, is a cisgender man. You know?
Also, holy shit, you guys. Testosterone makes you so fucking horny. Did you even know? I can't even take it. I'm literally humping the walls like an unfixed puppy. I need to vent all of this libidinal energy that I just keep generating. So, here you go. The thing is, like, in some ways, we're a subculture within a subculture that's fetishized but not really seen. And yet, we've been here all along, and as I argued in my previous video, there are more of us than you think. So this is from Dylan Edwards' Transposes, which was published in 2012. And he says, "You might be tempted to think that queer-identified female-to-male trans person is such a narrowly defined subset of a subset of a subset that surely their stories can't be all that varied. And yet, varied they are, from genderqueers to staunchly male-identified gay guys to trans men who only date other trans men. From vanilla to kinky, monogamous to poly, each person's story is a unique take on the queer FTM identity." And you can also see this clipping from FTM issue 1 regarding gay and bi trans men. They're both a group of mutual support as well as a study that's being done on them. Here's another similar posting from the East Coast FTM group from 1998. As a side note, lots of this archival research is from FTM, which was a publication that was created by Lou Sullivan, and I and many like me owe him a great debt of gratitude. Here's from Transposes again. "His story followed and I always knew I was a straight guy, and I always knew I liked straight woman kind of trajectory. The same thing I keep hearing over and over." Are you familiar with Lou Sullivan? No. He was the one who got the medical establishment to acknowledge that gay FTMs actually exist. He lived full-time as a gay man. Wow, that's really... wow. I'm also accessing most of the archival materials that I've been using through the UVic Trans Archive. Shout out to my alma mater for this amazing resource, which I did not fucking know existed while I was one of the 2 openly trans students at this university's English department. I also just quickly, I'm going to say, terminologically, a lot of the older materials use the term FTM, which for those who are younger and not familiar with it, stands for female to male, which is a older term that used to be used for trans guys. I know that it's not preferable, but it is the name of the publication, and so I will use it when I'm reading. So just quick warning about that. Also, while I'm at it, FTM is not above criticism. It definitely contains some trans infighting BS, which I do not want to perpetuate with this video. So this is a clipping from the July 1995 issue, in which basically the person is upset that they had gone to a meeting for general trans people, and then they had been upset because there were a number of trans women who were there, one of whom had said that, quote, "facing the loss of the life-giving female organs makes having transsexual surgery, i.e. gender reconstruction surgery, much more difficult a decision for the female to male," to which I responded, that I being the author, "You were projecting your stuff about femininity onto transsexual men. All in all, the show was a horrible experience full of misinformation, exaggeration, pompous statements, and grandstanding." But the cool thing is, like, a couple of years later, there was a piece published in the Letters of FTM, which I think is a really nice rebuttal. I'm actually just going to read this in its entirety, if y'all don't mind. So it's by a trans woman, and it says, "Quite honestly, James, if you think back to when you thought you were the only one, I'm sure it was the stories of our predecessors in the tabloid papers that gave you hope, most being MTF, trans women. And I'm sure for most, their first contact with any transsexuals were MTFs. I am not defending the undefendable, as I know not everyone who has a vaginoplasty has made the right choice. I wouldn't knock them. I know how you feel. A lot of FTMs, not all, dislike MTFs. If that's the case, and you guys feel like Miss Raymond and her empire, that's sad. Our differences broke up Shaft and later Gender Dysphoria Trust. It's because a lot of trans women go to ground after surgery and lose contact. Most organizations who support transsexuals in this country couldn't tell you how many post-ops there are, and we can guess at only 10,000. As you know, we can't change our birth certificates in this country, but one piece of paper won't change anything. If MTFs and FTMs can't get on and accept each other, then how can we expect others to? We have to accept some are straight, some gay, and some bisexual, and fight together against oppression and hatred. From what I've read about Brandon Tina, Christian Page, and Chanel Pickett, some of our own who have been murdered, it's an uphill struggle." And this kind of reflects that, like, in general, trans men owe a great debt of gratitude to trans feminine activists for the rights that we have because they have used their visibility to protect all of us.
There was some media I was exposed to with trans women, and usually negative media, but also some that presented trans women in a positive light. And I remember always thinking, God, I wish I could do that the other way around. And that became like sort of like this goal in my head without like any realization that it actually was something that people do all the time.
Yeah.
Uneasy eyes rest on a clock. Another's hand reveals a
Martha Davis, Don't Tell Me the Time, from 1987. And here is an article from FTM where somebody is thinking about and looking at this music video. It says, have you seen the video of the song Don't Tell Me the Time by Martha Davis on MTV or your favorite music video program? Davis dresses in her boyfriend's clothes in private and caresses herself, but the camera shows her hand moving over a male body. Very interesting. You know, I used to think you might be familiar with this concept of autogynephilia, which is a transmisogynistic stereotype that was started by so-called psychologist Ray Blanchard, and basically amounts to the idea that queer trans women basically just fetishize being women, which is obviously wrong. And I used to think that there wasn't really a trans masc version of this. It turns out I was really, really, really wrong, unfortunately, and I'm sad to hear about it.
A trans exclusionary homosexual male community, referred to as, like this roachified fujoshi, and what the Blanchards prefer to call the auto-homoeroticism, a subtext of auto-androphilia.
Roachified fujoshi means, because I know what fujoshi means.
Okay. So here, hold on. Let me pull up the good old Urban Dictionary definition of roachified.
Oh no! This is
that way we get the full effect.
Oh no!
There we go.
I'm afraid.
Roachification. Roachification. Adjective, verb. The process of a FTM or transmasculine person how do you pronounce that? Metaphoricizing from a beautiful girl to the most disgusting, vile, greasy, horrific boy there has ever been. In extreme cases, even an incel.
Like, so much of the discourse about trans young people in general presumes that, like, by seeing this stuff, youth become trans, as opposed to what it clearly and obviously actually is, which is, like, that's the
yeah, absolutely.
thing.
I mean, Yowie did make me transgender, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Autogynephilia, right? In reference to trans women, it's certainly the most popularized term among the psychoanalysis community when it comes to transgender people. But they do present another term for transmasculine people, that being the reverse of it, which is autoandrophilia.
Is this proposed by Blanchard himself, or people sort of like in his tradition?
Autoandrophilia is dismissed by Blanchard himself, but people within like his school of theory do discuss it quite a lot, or especially if they're TERFs. Blanchard himself did coin auto-homoeroticism, though, which is the idea of that most trans men are gay, and that most trans men transition because they're aroused by the concept of being a gay man.
I feel like so much of this is like, who else is aroused by the concept of being a gay man? Gay men! Like, yeah, bro.
I mean, I'll jokingly call myself an auto-androphilia or auto-homoerotic. Because, like, who isn't? I mean, like... what's wrong with sexually embracing your identity?
Exactly. I
mean, there's a massive amount of men, including, straight men, who are super turned on by the fact that they're men.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the most quote-unquote auto-androphilic people I've met have been, like, cis male bodybuilders.
Yeah, bro. Is basically everything that I've said about it so far, is that it takes a set of behaviors which, if you were to interpret them through trans masculine people who are queer, which, in fairness to them, appears to be most of us. But if you take that behavior that we exhibit as youths and then as adults, and you read it through the lens of, oh, these are queer men or masculine people who are not exposed to the typical pathway through which gay men or queer men are socialized, and therefore they have to approach it from a different angle. But essentially all of the behaviors that they stigmatize us for are normal queer male behavior. And it's just that there's the refusal to understand that a person who was assigned female at birth could be queer man. Like, fundamentally.
Yeah. And that's what it is, absolutely. Where these terminologies that they use could very, very easily be applied to cis people if they just removed the part of the definition that says when a female experiences or when a male experiences this. Quote unquote female, quote unquote male. Homophobia. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's just wild how they construct these concepts and then completely dismiss the people who they've constructed these concepts around. Where we're like, well, we can tell you what our thing is. Like, we can tell you why we are this way or why we are this way. I mean, actually, you know what? I can't tell you. I can't fully tell you that. I don't think anybody can. I don't think a cis person could either.
They definitely can't. They probably could tell you less.
Absolutely. But we can tell you, we could easily tell them who we are and, you know, the things that we face, and certainly what we're not.
Yeah.
And what we're not is the thing you've constructed that's based, you know, primarily, like, you know, on some of, like, Freud's work on gender.
So, another way the transmasc sexuality is dismissed is through the idea of sexual objectification that's applied to women and then, by extension, as assigned people who were assigned female at birth to trans men.
I know that this conversation is specifically centered around transmasculine people, and I'm not trying to like take the emphasis off of that, but it does kind of feel like the other side of the coin to much of what is experienced by many trans feminine individuals and how society will routinely hypersexualize them or accuse them of, you know, just inherent sexual, danger just by virtue of existing. And in the same way that I feel like society is inflicting, you know, this incredibly horrific bioessentialist view of them on them, I feel like it's kind of sort of an inverse almost in what happens to us, in the same way that they're treated as like an outgrowth of their assigned gender at birth, and therefore it's like, you're bad. It's for us, it's kind of the opposite, where we're also sort of treated as an outgrowth of our assigned gender at birth, and as a result, it's, you can't know any better. You can't have agency. You probably don't want sex at all, do you?
A weird example of this is the story of George Green of Petersburg, Virginia, who died in 1902 and was thereafter revealed to have been assigned female at birth. The article is surprisingly lovely at first and does not misgender him, but then, overcome with grief. The wife is almost overcome with grief. No sorrow more profound or deeper was ever seen. As soon as the body had been prepared, Mrs. Green, the wife, was interviewed. Did you know your husband was a woman before you married him? She was asked. No, she replied, as firmly as her grief would permit her to emphasize her words. Why the passionate love of these women for each other existed may never be known. The reporter called several times this afternoon and evening for another conversation with the grief-stricken woman, but he was not permitted to see her. Each time he was told that she was peacefully sleeping, and her family refused to wake her. Back of all of there may still be a deeper mystery. Many reasons are suggested for this disguise, but absolutely nothing definite. Green is said to own some valuable property near Raleigh, North Carolina, but this case obtained recently, and therefore could not be connected with the disguise. It is a mystery still unsolved, and the problem can only be worked out by the woman so long thought to be a wife. Wah, wah. So as you can see, similarly to how I was discussing with Sam, there's just this idea that like people who are assigned female at birth, like, don't really even have sexuality, that, like, by definition, like, we don't have sexual desire or agency, it's purely reactive. And kind of a weird off-growth of this is that some women view trans men as safe men, someone who they can get the things that they want from men from, but who is not threatening and who has no desires of their own. So shout out to Nicodemus for introducing me to the manga After School Nightmare, in which one of the characters, Kyoko, hates men, but is in love with the main character because he's good compared to other men. So this manga is like truly bonkers, but to just kind of briefly summarize, the premise is that Ichijo, who is a high school boy, goes through these prophetic nightmares where he's secretly revealed to be a woman because, spoilers, I guess, for the first chapter, it turns out that they actually haven't been born yet. And this whole dream high school that they're experiencing is actually a psychosexual drama to decide the gender assignment of the fetus or something. Like I said, this manga is just buck wild. Anyway, what was I talking about?
I think there's this sort of expectation among trans men to be sort of this, oh my god, sorry, to be sort of quote unquote pure of nature, where you sort of have to be both this masculine ideal but also this non-threatening soft boy, and with that certain expectations with our sexuality where we have to love women, but we can't express sexual desire for women because that seems predatory or overly masculine in a way that's not ideal. And then there's, an aspect of homophobia and biphobia in it as well.
It's something I've witnessed and I've always kind of questioned to myself. It's like, is it really a good idea to be telling yourself that any one group of people in a gender or whatever really inherently safe? I wonder what it is that plays into them thinking of trans men specifically as safe in a way that others wouldn't be.
Yeah, if you were to
I mean, I have my speculative ideas, but I wonder.
Yeah. In The Thing with the Knife, from Transmasc sci-fi anthology The World Beyond Our Station, which, full disclosure, I was also featured in, Clock-Hearted Crocodile writes, comparing transmasculine experience to that of an android. And they show that how, trans men, similarly to androids, are characterized as having interchangeable and sexless body parts, and that we're meant to be of service to men and to women, but not really to experience pleasure in our own right among them. Sometimes we even feel this way to ourselves. Here's a piece from Chrysalis. May 8th, 1981. Even though I've been married 8 years now, I find I do not know how to receive love from Bonnie. I do not know how to deal with my body being turned on by someone else, and I too find, since I'm not taking testosterone, that my sex drive is very low, and it takes more to turn me on. Turn on makes me think of a light switch, and perhaps I am expecting too much of my body. For many years I have controlled all of its reactions as a means of survival and out of habit, but I have turned it off or on. Unfortunately, it has been off more than on. It seems whenever I tell someone about me, they think Bonnie is wonderful, which I think bothers her a bit. At least, she's asked why people say so. It's because of the unusual circumstances surrounding my life, which she overlooks. Often I think she forgets that I'm not a normal man. As I got more feminine, as my breasts grew, as my hips widened, I became more and more detached from my body. I wish I had pictures from that time. I don't know if I would recognize that girl. I remember so desperately to fit in, to be one of the girls, to have a boy want me. From about age 14 to 18, I was very promiscuous. I wanted to prove I was female. There were a couple of men who I loved. They were a part of the man inside me. Each was different, but yet so much of what I wanted to be. When I look in the mirror, sometimes I like the man who looks back at me. I accept that which is considered feminine. As I become more comfortable with myself, I become less shamed. As I've gotten older, I realize that I am both a woman and a man, that I have lived as both a woman and a man, and that this is okay. When you're a trans guy, there's this pressure at a young age to behave the way that straight girls do, which is a really weird passive role, a role where you're assumed to not have a sex drive at all.
Me decisively, it's like, are you gay? It's like, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I like some guys. Are you straight? Well, no, but I mean, I've liked some girls. Oh, then you're bi. I don't know. I don't really connect with that either. I don't even know why I don't. I just don't. And to this day, I'm not really sure, like, who, if anybody, I have a preference for, or what specifically makes my sexuality tick. And I feel like part of it might be because for so long I didn't really think of trans guys as like sexual actors, like people who could have sexuality at all, to the point where even for myself, I kind of diminished the idea of who am I attracted to, and instead I think I thought of it a little bit more as like who would be attracted to me, you know? So I wasn't really thinking about whether I was even enjoying myself. Instead, I was thinking about who is the most likely to give me any positive affirmation for my body in the current state that it's in.
Again, this is so ironic to me because, guys, testosterone makes you so horny. You can't see, but I'm literally jerking off under the table right now. The idea that I and all of the other dumb, horny guys that I know don't have sexual initiative is just so laughable. Another really interesting example of this is a film called Dorian Gray in the Mirror of the Yellow Press. It's a West German film from 1984. It features a female actor playing Dorian Gray to emphasize his beauty. It's kind of some trippy 80s nonsense, critiquing advertising and celebrity culture. And the Lord Watton-esque character is also cast as a woman. What I like about this film is it kind of reveals how the story of Dorian Gray is always kind of being about gay trans masc ennui, the bottom life, being held captive to a youth and a beauty that have nothing to do with you. So as you can see in this scene of Dorian rowing, there's kind of like a mix of masculine and feminine embodiment. It's almost like a man's body, but this sort of like slutty, bottomish bodily performance. He has this really like foppish posture. And kind of going with these stereotypes based on the assigned sex at birth. Dorian is kind of dumb. He's something to be seen and not heard. He's like a girl, just arm candy. So you can see him like participating in this kind of like strange ritual that like is among cis people. And they kind of like treat him as a commodity and laugh when he tries to participate. But at the same time, like they expect his participation nonetheless. You can also see, like, in the story, Watton takes Dorian to this warehouse where they experience queer eroticism among the working class in this stylized and almost violent way. And in the way that it's framed, like, the embodiment of the racialized people is so much more real and genuine. You can see the children in Tarabish dancing in the empty warehouse, the brown women experiencing paroxysms of religious ecstasy and doing puppet magic. Even sex workers' embodiment seems more real or more genuine, or at least more intended for a clear audience. So there's this shot of Dorian crashed out among men of color and working class men, but clearly not one of them. This image, I could write a whole fucking PhD dissertation on it and like its racial politics, but let's keep it moving for now. In the morning when he wakes up after his opium binge, he's looked over by these figures of patriarchs and chased by paparazzi. There's this intense sense of being watched, of being compared to this standard of masculinity that like is just not attainable. And overall, the feeling of being sexualized without being sexual. The photos of his debauchery is shown all over. It's all abetted and planned by Watton. Even though she's the one who introduced them to that, she's also profiting from his downfall. But she also doesn't want to be implicated. The spectacle is Dorian, and she laughs at his breakdown, but she doesn't want to be shown to have a part of it. So as Dorian says,
Selbst die privatesten Dinge sind arrangiert.
In the end, Dorian erotically and dramatically kills Watton and the other news executives who are wearing papier-mâché cock heads. And in the final scene, the people who wore the cock heads ceremonially bury them, being returned to their former selves. Then Dorian comes by and kills them anyway, and then he fakes his own death. And basically, all of this is to say that transmasculine experience is characterized by fumbling toward a genuine male eroticism, from the perspective of having been a victim of patriarchy and while simultaneously being watched and continuing to experience the threats of patriarchy. I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say, but here's a couple excerpts from a piece called Belonging from the July 1995 FTM. I've had the privilege to be in the company of a great man. He has a zest for scholarship that far exceeds his lover's enchantment. I know that when he arrives at those special forks in the road, he will blaze a trail straight up the split, and whatever is left behind will be established pavement. I wish him luck in all his pursuits. Without his help, I would not have developed as much testicular fortitude. To me, he is my big brother. He sat on that hard wooden chair and was so livid that I thought the chair would burst into flames. All this time he felt that he had been deceived and certain information withheld from him. He was told not to go to group because it would have a negative influence on him. I had no idea that this person and I would become so close. I had no idea that he would shed that anger like an old shirt. I hardly recognize him from his former self of yesteryear. He's enjoyed almost every moment of his personal growth. Anytime I see him, he is smiling. The sun is shining on his day when he approaches me. I can't help but feel sheer celebration. He doesn't take a whole lot for granted. I know I'm fortunate to know such a happy man. There are few and far between. My lady friend became more distant after I came out to her. I took it in stride because I didn't allow myself to get attached. I expected that she would not return. I telephoned her once to test the waters. When I suggested that we meet for coffee sometime, she appreciated the offer but declined. She added by announcing that she was dating other men. I thanked her for giving me time. She admitted that she had thought long and hard about my gender status. She said she still didn't know what to think or feel. She said she couldn't imagine what I would have looked like as my former self. Then we said goodbye. I was in the record store looking for my favorite artist. Briefly glancing up, I saw a contoured chest wrapped in a flowery summer dress. Incredulous, I sighed and went back to what I was doing. Feeling I was being watched, I looked up. Have you renounced women? Lady friend had a bright smile on her face. I hadn't seen her in a few months. My jaw dropped and then I closed it and cleared my throat. I grinned impishly and replied, well, there's women that I renounce and there's women that I don't. Am I one of those that you renounced? I don't know, I said as I shifted my weight to the other leg. She lowered her eyes and nodded. But I'll listen to strong arguments for why I should keep your company. She looked up and smiled coyly. A few months later, my lady friend admitted to me that compared to other men, I treated her with a deeper appreciation. She said she liked the way I celebrated my life and that she was part of my celebration. It's a nice feeling to belong to somebody. In a way, the question is, what is masculinity itself? What is male embodiment? How are we men without reproducing toxicity, without LARPing as violent patriarchs? So this is from Chaos Comics, which I'll talk about probably more later. So the voiceover says, they had cut off Charlie's hair off and broken her wrist. I felt like I had failed to protect her, but I didn't care because she was alive and that was all that mattered. My leg was broken, as were a couple of my ribs. Everything hurt, but she was okay. She was there. Of course, masculinity is more than just being physically strong and protecting your loved ones, as we trans guys sometimes have to be reminded. Fine then! You want violence? All it does is hurt people. The people you care about. It never helps. I don't need you to protect me. I can fucking handle myself. And I choose not to be violent. And you will respect that. Of course, because Tom's a horny little shit, we can't be sure how much the message sink in, which, as a horny little shit myself, I'm honor-bound to respect. Here's from Chrysalis, excerpts from My Journey with My Body by Jason Cromwell. December 28th, 1972. Masculinity is a very sensitive thing. Being transsexual is hell. You belong to neither sex, yet you belong to both, wanting only the one. Unconsciously, my brothers and my stepfather pose a threat to my masculinity. The hardness of their features, the deepness of their voices, the jokes they make about sex that I can't make because being virile doesn't belong to me. I haven't the necessary equipment to perform. I tell myself this doesn't matter, yet I know this does not cover up the facts. All my life I've fought femininity. Too many men take their masculinity for granted. How does someone like me explain to society that being transsexual is not homosexuality, that the difference lies in not just attraction, but in a need to change the body? I don't know. I only know that at times I find it unbearable.
I totally feel that in terms of like being young and like being put into the position of straight girl, but knowing that something's off. Like that's not it. That's not it. Whatever it is, it's not that. I I definitely empathize with that. I think sometimes it can get really curious too when your experiences start being like one foot in one camp and one in the other, but no one relationship really fits with you. Like sometimes I've had moments where like, yeah, I'm queer, but I think that more often than not, I'm a little more attracted to guys than girls, but not by a lot, but a bit. And so sometimes when I was still ideating and trying to figure myself out, I would spend a lot of time online in spaces that were like mostly for queer or mostly gay identified trans guys. And I won't lie, and this isn't me being like, not like other trans guys, but sometimes we just didn't have a whole lot in common. And this is nothing wrong. This is no nothing wrong whatsoever. It's just I just struggled to find people that I had a whole lot in common with in general. You know, I just different hobbies, different lanes, just whatever. And then I'd be like, all right, well, I'm gonna go hang out with some other trans guys, and I'll go hang out in online spaces for trans guys who, and again, not to act like one is more legitimate or the other, but guys who like just had interests that were a little bit more aligned with myself, experiences in terms of like presentation choices, sometimes a little less gender nonconforming, sometimes a little more like, I guess a little bit more like traditionally masculine, all things considered. And sometimes there I would find people I have more in common with. And then they're all attracted to, well, not all, but predominantly attracted to women, mostly, if not entirely. It's like, oh, that is an experience we don't have in common. I am mostly into guys. And eventually I started to feel like this weird in-between zone where it's like, oh, well, I don't fit in very well with this stereotype, and I don't fit in very well with that stereotype. Is there something wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
And it would take a long time before I realized that actually most people don't fit cleanly into stereotypes, and they're stereotypes for a reason.
That part. In a way, what I'm trying to do here is assert trans men, particularly queer trans men, as sexual actors. I know everybody's upset by the heel turn of our problematic trans Uncle Buck Angel, but think about how he and trans men of their generation made their careers, sold their sexuality, somewhere along the line between I'm just a man like you and a fun new type of sex object. Not a man, but a lady that looks like a man. A hot new special type of fuckhole. If you haven't heard of it before, I'm sorry on so many levels to inform you of the existence of bonushoboys.com. And of the fact that Buck Angel made his career as the man with a pussy, the only one, I'm sure.
How well would you say that like trans masculine people's sexuality is represented in culture and like okay, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the most culturally adept, but there's nothing. Like really, like we have Elliot Page, who is, I haven't seen the Umbrella Academy, so I haven't seen how he's handled in there, but I feel like at least post transition hasn't really been like particularly well. I guess there was the photo shoot, and that was sort of like, you know, prettied up, like we're gonna sexualize this man, but I feel like there's just very little out there for us, and I don't know, most of the like cultural phenomena surrounding us really infantilizes us and treats us like you know, fragile little girls, and you know, have to be protected and such, and like that doesn't really jive with having any sort of like cultural perception of transmasc sexuality, if that's your sort of culture war bits that are coming into it.
Would you say that like it's like a desexualized like
yeah, absolutely.
perception?
Like I'm trying to think of solid examples so I'm not just like making stuff up. But my making stuff up answer immediately tends towards like absolutely yes. You know, it's very much like, oh, you're sort of like, you know, little twinks, like you're sort of hot, but you know, you're not really as capable of sexuality as men.
Yeah. It's definitely a sexual object role, in my opinion, not a sexual subject.
Yeah, I will admit to being someone who is not like super aware of where pornography's at these days. But all of my like awareness and experience there was very much like, okay, so I can sort of maybe find some like gay transmasc bottoms.
Yeah.
Maybe. But like the idea of a transmasc top is like not really out there. And like I'm not a top, but I sure would like to see some tops out there. I think that'd be great. And I know they exist. So it's just it is a lot of that like object and like I don't know. It feels like generally very much we're seen as like a soft replacement to cis men. All the edges have been rounded off.
Yeah.
And part of me is like, well, in terms of like we have a vague handle on understanding misogyny. Yeah, maybe we can have some of the hard edges rounded off, but maybe that's not a good view to apply to all of it, you know?
Yeah.
It seems like we've always had this problem. Our sexuality is always unknown to people, always erased, even by those positioned to speak for us. See, for example, this video review of a Chance Ryder porno from the 1997 FTM, noting how he chose to pretend to be the world's only true hermaphrodite rather than reveal himself as a trans man. And this isn't to stigmatize people who do front hole stuff. Bug, one of my interviewees, said, quote, "As much as I love talking about dick and balls, I think we could stand to talk about boy cunt some more. I do sometimes feel that I should be more into feminine people sexually, but that comes more from a need to appear externally queer to people who think I'm a woman. To them, me choosing masculine partners while choosing not to medically transition makes me straight, which I resent. But as my friends and partners, and most importantly, I know that the way that I fuck guys is gay as hell, and that's really important to me." Thanks, Bug. Moreover, a significant portion of the transphobia that we experience as trans guys is basically requiring us to continue to be attractive to implicitly straight men. So shout out to Nicodemus again for introducing me to this artist whose images will haunt the depths of my subconscious forevermore. So here you can see this comic by Lacry Boy on Twitter. By the way, the account is extremely not safe for work, depicting the roachification of a trans guy. So from left to right, you can see this person going from a cute girl to a disgusting, horny, slobbery, Dorito-covered gamer nerd. OMG, it's me for real. Or what about Lacry Boy comic number 2, depicting a young trans guy balking at being forced to wear a dress and hanging out with his skater friends only after transitioning to be into cat ears and schoolgirl outfits, and worst of all, perhaps, being with a man. I'm also in this image, and I like it even less. But derision aside, what I love about these comics is that they simultaneously parody the rhetoric that we're failing our duty by becoming unattractive to straight men, while revealing that we are attractive in our true forms to lots of people, including straight women, queer men, and bi people of all genders. Unfortunately, I can't say I feel the same level of positivity for the rest of this person's art, and I also can't show any of it on this platform, so click through the link at your own risk. In general, the understanding of sex that we have in society is very reductive.
There is just like a lot of focus on specifically penis and vagina penetrative sex as like that's sex. And yes, that does require an equation that really reduces people down to those parts, but like sex is a much broader act than that, and there's a lot of things you can do. I was gonna say, like, frankly, before even involving the genitalia, but that depends on your definition of sex. But you know,
Sure.
but there's such a wide and varied range of things you can do for sexual pleasure that are not specifically penis and vagina penetrative sex, and that don't require that the participants have a strict set of genitalia. And like, never mind the fact that like, as soon as you introduce the idea of like topping and bottoming and any idea of dominance and the way that gets mapped to masculine and feminine and penetrative and receptive in term is like quite fucked.
Say more about that. If you...
Well, just yeah. I mean, I don't know how much more there is than that, because that's the basis of it to me. Is like, I don't. We've tied a whole bunch of opposing ideas together into sets, and we've said that penetrative and dominant and top and masculine are all in the same set, and they're not for a lot of people. And the way that we impose these ideas is not free of harm for the people who don't fit them.
Yeah.
It's very much like it's not a social stereotype that doesn't have consequences. It's a social stereotype that inflicts, even among the people who fit it, really inflicts a whole lot of strictures to fit them to those norms and to be the exact version of masculinity. And like, I cannot say this for sure in any way, but I gotta imagine that does not help a lot of straight cis men's like sex lives either.
No, it doesn't appear that way from where I have been standing.
Certainly not. I still notice that I'm often like hesitant to initiate or hesitant to be the person who starts things, because that still doesn't quite like feel like the role. But yeah, it was very much sort of the dominant cultural norms were what I was learning from, because there really wasn't much out there other than that. Well, okay, it was that, and then like fanfic and erotica, which is mostly to be like it was a lot of like BDSM norms, which are not really that distinct from cultural norms. They still tend to be very heavily like masculine dominant, female submissive coded. So that doesn't really get you any different sort of ideas other than like, yeah, you act in this way and you respond to people in this way.
The thing that I find really frustrating about all of this is that trans masks do have sexuality, damn it, and it's hilarious and glorious. This is Perfectly Modular Male, a song by Dallas Denny that was published in Chrysalis Quarterly in this summer 1995 issue. I'm not going to sing it, I'm sorry. I'm a perfectly modular male. I brought the one I'm wearing at a rummage sale. I have one for every occasion. I have one for every need. I have one of every side, and I have one to stand and pee. They come in designer colors, and they serve me without fail. I'm a perfectly modular male. I have one that's made of fabric. Well, really, it's just a sock. But it comes in very handy when I need to have a cock. I have an assortment for the bedroom, and they never kiss and tell. I'm a perfectly modular male. I have one called Widowmaker. I have one that gives off sparks. I have one that's fluorescent, and it glows red in the dark. I have one I can inflate until it's hard as any nail. I'm a perfectly modular male. So if yours ever disappoints you, if yours ever doesn't spurt, you can always just go shopping at the mall right after work. And if you see one that you fancy, you should buy it without fail and be a perfectly modular male. So one crucial piece of trans representation that I had as a teenager that I really clung to was Chaos Comics circa 2007 by Tab Kimpton. So in particular, Tom's story was really pivotal for me as a baby trans person. It was also shouted out by Bug and Lee. And for me personally, it was the only story I came across as a teenager that actually showed someone like me, a queer trans guy, fumbling with his gender presentation and his attraction to men. Here's a comment from the website, which I also really related to. It's posted in December of 2015 by My Body is a Cage. And they said, I am Tom, and I need to see what happens with Alex. Thank you for a realistic and beautifully drawn comic about a gay trans guy, gay cis guy relationship. Please continue this storyline. Also, as I mentioned, Dylan Edwards' Transposes, which came out a couple of years after I did. Here's an excerpt from James's story. I didn't date in high school. I had horrible unrequited crushes on strange, ugly boys who had horrible unrequited crushes on good-looking girls. Fuck me. It was so relatable. As much as I wanted to sleep with men, I wasn't having any luck, especially since I kept getting crushes on gay guys. So I decided maybe my friends had a point. I had serious doubts about this new identity, but hey, maybe if I was a lesbian, it might mean I actually got laid for a change. This image from Chaos Comics changed my fucking life, in which Charlie comes out to Tom as a trans girl, and Tom, in response, comes out to her as a trans guy by first telling her that he's gay. Most of the guys that I talked to described having representations that they had to put together or read trans masculinity into. So Bug said that they felt drawn to queer-coded characters, but, quote, they never felt like they were just like them for real. Especially as an Aerospec NB, there wasn't anybody like them that they could see. They couldn't relate to boys or girls or even tomboyish girls. The way relationships were represented in the media they consumed didn't make any sense to them. And the representations of trans masks that do exist often show a pressure to be straight, as that excerpt from James's story depicted.
The term tomboy, in the Filipino context, broadly refers to male or masculine identified females or transgendered subjects on the female to male spectrum of embodiments, practices, and identities in the Philippines or Filipino diaspora, who often have sexual and emotional relationships with feminine females who identify as women. So that's the tomboy identity in a nutshell, defined by Fajardo. Getting into my experience, definitely because you talked about how transmasculine sexuality is portrayed. In my experience, tomboy is all of which I already defined, or Fajardo defined, but more commonly, the term that would be the transliteration from tomboy that people often say is lesbian. So it is, though there is some, it's sort of contentious, to say the least. Like, some people, like transmasculine people in the Philippines, are often called tomboy, often by cis straight people. And I feel like there's the younger generation, especially, or like those who would broadly identify as transsexual, not transgender, would be like, no, I'm not a lesbian. Like, it's so ubiquitous that tomboy means lesbian because the thing about the Philippines that I don't think is unique, but is particular to the Philippines, and also I think several of what we would call like third world countries, is that there's not really a huge delineating line between like transgender and homosexual, like transsexual and homosexual. Like if you are bakla, the perception of that is a coercively assigned male at birth person who is feminine presenting and who has sexual or emotional relationships with ostensibly other men. And that also tends to lump in like trans women or trans women as well. So tomboy as an identifier by its nature, being rooted in that, also lumps in like masculine lesbians, people who would identify as non-binary, trans men who would be like very masculine in a sense. So yeah, and one of the defining characteristics is an attraction to women, right? So that is because it's very tied to lesbianism. Like, it's the same tropes apply basically to, you know, like the predatory butch that was like leering on women, something like that, basically. Like, you know, like being holdovers, basically. This is Fajardo's definition. The tomboys go after femmes.
Yeah.
That, like, it's very like it's very like a post World War II conception of butch femme in that sense. It's very tied into butch femme culture, and as an offshoot of that, it's kind of like heterosexual, transsexual, heterosexual like affirmation of your masculinity by dating and being with femmes.
Yeah.
Because the tomboy is not considered a true woman in the culture. The tomboy is a third gender. There's a children's rhyme. That goes girl, boy, bakla, tomboy, butiki, lizard, baboy, pig. So it's like the 5 categories of people. And bakla and tomboy are their own separate category. And that's what I stand by. Bakla and tomboy are third genders and should be fucking understood as such. And anyway, and so because the tomboy is not considered a real woman, but they date real women who at some point could leave them for a real man, you know? So that was my understanding of FTM sexuality pre-coming out, basically. And I did not even know that tomboys could date anyone they liked, but I knew I wanted to be read as a man. I wanted to live as a man, and I wanted to physically transition to do it. And so for that whole, and so for my early transitory period, actually, I still identified as straight. I identified myself as a straight trans, and in my coming out post, because I came out through Facebook, because of course it was the pandemic. I couldn't physically come out to, and so I was like, "Hey guys, I'm coming out as straight." It changed when I had feelings for someone. I developed feelings for someone who's a man, and then I realized, oh my god, I'm actually really attracted to him. Like, not just, like, not just in a friend way, because he was a very good friend of mine, but I wanted to be more than friends, and basically, I was like, and that was like I feel, and because it was also like the pandemic, and people were just very on edge by then also, I was like, it tore me asunder basically. I was like so dramatic, so gay, writing constantly thinking about this guy, like, oh my god, I'm feeling, like, no exaggeration, because feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time after puberty. Like, the only times I could recall similar feelings were my boy crushes from my childhood, like my classmates who I was really into but could never like really express, or could really have reciprocated, because again, living as a woman, living as a young woman, and now that I was trying to live as like a super butch straight guy, at least in my mind, to have those feelings come flooding back, hit me on the head. I'm telling you, it felt exactly and I was like, oh my god. And then I had another, and then I had an identity crisis, and I think that lasted for about a year and a half.
Wow.
Before I finally was like, oh my god, I'm fucking gay.
The thing about gay love is that it can be a celebration of similarity, the eroticism of the mirror, but not. Here's a piece from a Bay Area reporter profile of Matt Rice, who was depicted in the image of the title card, describing his T for T relationship. Quote, "There's something about this sameness that's very erotic. I think that as trans men have come together in recent years as a group of people and talked about our issues, we've realized that we're also attracted to each other. Being able to eroticize your own image, there's something powerful about that. Many trans folks do prefer T for T, even though it's stigmatized."
When there's a fellow trans guy here, which is not often, not very many trans men here are gay, or queers in general.
Sure.
So when I do come across them, I just like to say hi. Like, I don't even try to hook up with them. I don't try to hook up with them usually.
Yeah.
Only if I want to, because the thing also with FTMs here is that they're not often into other FTMs.
Right.
Like, I find that the American trans masks are more open, at least in my perception. You guys are more open to dating and being with other trans people, like T for T.
Yeah.
Like T for T. You guys basically coined that. When I come across another trans guy, like, they're usually looking for. So I was like, okay, I just want to chat. I just like to be friends.
Word. Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. I do like. Why do you think that is? If you have a guess or a speculation.
I think it's kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of like a reverse Uno card homophobia. You know, I'm serious, because there is even among like bakla, okay, even among like trans friends, it's not popular for a bakla to be with another bakla, basically, because it's basically like, because they're not lesbian, you know.
Sure.
Because if you get with someone because it's understood in those terms, like if like a bakla goes with lalaki, or a real man, a tomboy goes with a babae, a real woman.
Sure.
That's kind of like the popular conception, because otherwise, if a bakla goes with another bakla, a tomboy goes with another, that's like double game.
Yeah.
Ew.
The gay squared.
I don't know, especially now I'm at the point where I'm like, if I'm going to date another person, it's going to be a trans person.
Word. Can you speak more as to why that would be?
There's just an understanding that is not impossible to find with cis people, but much harder to find with cis people, where there's just a better understanding of like bodies and gender, and not seeing those, like seeing some set of parts as being uniquely tied to gender. That is just has not been my experience with cis people. Like most of my experiences with cis people, even the cis partners who I have like really genuinely had a good time with, have just had different mindsets around sex and gender that I'm not, I don't think, long-term compatible with. Like short-term, you know, friends with benefits sort of deal, maybe. But like, I don't want someone in my life long-term if they can't reconcile the fact that like my parts don't make me female. There's nothing inherently feminine about these parts, and like they can't. I've had partners in the past who were like technically straight men, who would be like, well, like, you know, I'm into you, but it's in a like, and this was before testosterone, because after testosterone that has shifted a fair bit. Now it's you know a little more level ground. But I had partners before testosterone where it was like, I'm into you in a straight way, but I still respect your gender, and I'm like, that doesn't really, like, that turned into a relationship with hour-long arguments over that very topic. You know, I don't want to live like that.
Compatible, yeah.
Eventually, I learned a magical phrase called T for T, and honestly, thank Christ. I mean, not to generalize or say every T for T relationship is, you know, heaven on earth, but like, holy moly, my quality of life went up quite a bit after I figured out about that concept.
So, for the viewers at home, can you say what that means to you?
T for T is like me as a trans person wanting to exclusively date either other trans or non-binary, or really just kind of like gender not cis people. You're not cis, sweet. If you are cis, I'm sorry, but it's been a real struggle.
What was different?
I think so. When I would try and date originally cis men, and then kind of like expanding and even dating some cis women, I think like a general recurring problem was that trans people, again, like a lot of the time they were operating from a very bioessentialist view of who trans people are, what they want to do sexually, what their bodies are for sexually, etc. All of which was very incompatible with me, and frankly, I found it very damaging after a while. Like I was really starting to internalize some serious self-hate. And then eventually I talked to a few of my other trans friends about it. They're like, honestly, if you date other trans people, then maybe, if nothing else, you'll come from a similar place of like where your insecurities might come from, or like maybe not as much of the bioessentialism. And honestly, I think that was a big part of why it was so much more comfortable to me. It's like we both understand, it's like, hey, sex isn't gender, and hey, we both kind of in different ways may feel like shit about ourselves about certain things, but that also means there's more understanding for things like, hey, I don't want to show this certain body part, is that okay? Or hey, I don't want to do this certain act, is that okay? And again, though you can't really like draw universal conclusions one way or another, once I started like only really dating other like trans people, I immediately realized, wow, there's a lot more understanding there. There's a lot more like respect and recognizing of boundaries, and even preemptively asking like, is this okay? Is this cool? I never been asked if anything was okay first until I started, dating other trans people, and then suddenly I was like, oh, I matter now? Oh, nice. They dignified me, and that helped me dignify myself. Suddenly it made me think, it's like, oh, I actually deserve to feel happy during the act of sex. It isn't just this like obligation that on some level is inherently like bad, but even outside of that, it's like, it was never for me to enjoy. I'm just like there. It wasn't really like that anymore. And when you're starting to be treated with more dignity, and dare I say it, actually treated like, like you're attractive, not just like this weird thing that cis people look at and are like, oh, that's not what I want, but like actually like you're good. Suddenly it's a lot easier to like yourself, and it's a lot easier to justify like actually participating in sex because you don't feel like you're letting your partner down. Because that's not true anymore. It's not like you're not a letdown because you're in a trans body, And that's just something that I think it took me a lot of time to unpack, but thankfully did eventually start to happen.
Even beyond T for T, there's something about having sexuality as a gay dude that's extremely affirming to queer trans men. So in the chaos scene where Tom meets Alex, he says, quote, "I dated men before, but only as Maria, and there I was as Tom, and Alex liked me as a man, and yeah, amazing." It depicts the thrill of pursuing men as a man, you know, like the chase, the kind of sexuality that there is between dudes, like the way that like it feels to like be sexually aggressive toward a man that is not socially acceptable as a woman, is all part of like queer transmasculine embodiment. You know, like in some ways as trans men, we also struggle to find authentic embodiment in gay sexuality. So like in straight trans guys, there's the trope of the stone butch. But what do we gay trans men have? This is a page from Chaos again. It says, "Before Alex, I had lost all kind of interest in things like sex, but with him in the picture, my body started to get its own opinions on how totally awesome sex would be. This led to several unsuccessful wank sessions, which just made me want to punch Jamie even more, you know, for being a cockblock." And then here's an article from FTM International, June 1997, discussing how to masturbate as a trans man, talking about the influence of testosterone, all this other stuff. And just in case I hadn't said this before, all of these links will be in the script, which will be available in the show notes. And also, speaking of stone butch, I don't necessarily want to say that that's a positive archetype for those that experience it. For one thing, it can be traumagenic, and also there's a certain type of erasure that straight trans men and the queer women who love them can experience. Overall, though, the common conception of trans men is as being straight, i.e. as being lesbians plus, evolved out of and still allied with the lesbian community.
Employed and still conflicted about whether or not I was a lesbian because I was in love with a trans woman, or if I was a gay man because I could only get off sexuality to gay porn, or if I was just some sort of perverted freak because the only exception to gay porn was porn that featured BDSM regardless of genders presented on the screen. And I was also so tied up in the guilt of being a man, which I had learned from years of liberal feminists and lesbian separatism, that it was an evil thing to be. That I knew I shouldn't ever consider the possibility of doing something as awful as not only having an interest in sex, but having it with a woman. I don't think any part of working through my sexuality was typical, though I have doubts that any queer person has a typical experience with sexuality and the development of it. The occasional sort of pressures I felt, I guess, being a transmasculine person or being a young butch was definitely an expectation to date femmes or to date women. You know, you couldn't date another butch. You couldn't have an interest in men because that meant you weren't a lesbian. If you weren't a lesbian, you couldn't be butch. And if you weren't butch and you were a woman, then you couldn't present yourself as a man.
Yeah, it's very, like, for lack of a better way to explain it, like, heteronormative?
I don't necessarily want to use the word heteronormative to describe butch femmes relationships.
Right.
Because it's more complicated than that, but certainly this society, or heterosexual society in general, sees it as a copy of heterosexuality. And in some ways it is. It's more like an intentional queering of these heterosexual norms, though. However, there was a pressure on me, and certainly other butch for butch people, to be interested in femmes. Because there was a stigmatization against that, where probably due because the fact that it was a queering of heterosexuality did mean there was some aspects of heterosexuality that were negative that leaked into it.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to hear more about the experience of having the way that people relate to you change as a result of your transition, both like what that looked like and how it felt.
Well, it felt nice for the most part. There were some drawbacks where, of course, I suddenly felt an internalized issue where I felt as though now my interactions with women were predatory, or that my interactions with gay men were also predatory, just in a different way. But for the most part, it felt good because I felt acknowledged as who I am. I felt more comfortable interacting with people because I knew they just didn't think of me as a woman or as woman-like or as a lesbian. And what it looked like was, you know, finding up the courage to go to gay bars more often or to go to gay bathhouses and to have these interactions with men and to open up my dating profiles to queer men. And to go into my local lesbian bar and be able to be like, yeah, I'm a dude, and still manage to hook up.
It's also difficult because, as Tom is depicted as having, many of us have experiences of sex from before transitioning or experiences of sexual assault that complicate our relationship to arousal and our bodies. In this scene, Alex asks Tom if he's ever had sex with a man before, and Tom says he doesn't remember, when we can clearly see in the art that he does remember, but that the experience was negative and that he doesn't feel comfortable talking about it. Part of it is that we can come to see ourselves as men by loving people who desired men, and by being desired as men. I'd call myself gay because I fetishize masculinity, even when it's found in women. 10-inch wangers are utterly lovely, but so are any human genitals, including, of course, the intermediate sort produced by the action of testosterone on clits. On the face of it, from a brief glimpse at gay male culture, one would assume that anyone who didn't have a regular dick would just be ignored or reviled. However, some of you guys seem to be hacking it. I assume that you're able to do so because there are some genetic gay guys whose sexuality is the same as mine, i.e. it's the image they get turned on by. The genitals are negotiable if everything else is attractive. Some of you may wonder why I don't just keep the woman's body and have sex with men that way. For starters, I'm not overly crazy about traditional vaginal sex. Second, I've been already told by a bisexual man that I'm like a man in bed, and I wouldn't want to waste that on straight men. They don't deserve it. And most importantly, I want my sex partners to see me as a man. I've suspected for years that I'm a gay guy who also likes women, and that seemed crazy. It's all started to make sense finally. In past visits to gay male presences, I've noticed that my female presence started to cool the otherwise free-flowing male sexual heat. Here I wanted the opposite. I came to incite and partake freely of abundant sexual energy. But who did I need to be to pull that off? I had to be something of a trickster. I didn't want to be boxed and dismissed as female. I belonged in the space marked boys' room. I wanted into the clubhouse and into the hothouse and into some juicy boy flesh. There is something about Joseph that I resonate with. Dancing with radical fairy spectrum gyrated against his sinewy body, toward and against mine particularly pointedly. I thought, I want this man. I want this man as only a man wanting another man can want. But perhaps I'm acting out internalized heterophobia. The only way I can act on my attraction to men is as another man. No, that's not quite right. If anything along those lines is heterosporiphia, boredom rather than fear of things heterosexual. I can smell het men 100 yards away and they just don't float my boat. Whereas queer boys wang my wong just by blinking.
And now it's time for the bottom line.
Making friends with your asshole. So here's Alex Page reviewing Tommy, getting to know Tom and fantasizing about him as a man. It's just really lovely. And you can see like the sort of masculinity that Tom exudes is very much part of it from Alex's perspective, which is something that like is true of many trans guys, even if people don't talk about it. And again, I would argue that there's something in particular about being desired as a man by men, because as I discussed in my Bara video, men like different things about other men than women do in general. Check out this chaos page where Tom finally comes out to Alex. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I wanted to, but I was scared, okay? I couldn't get enough of the way you acted around me, and I was scared that if I told you, you'd treat me differently. This, of course, doesn't turn out to be the case in the comic, and there ends up being this really hilarious insert in one of the NSFW side comics where Alex tries to learn how to suck clit. As you can see, he's printed out an article entitled Cunnilingus, Lesbian Oral Sex, and he's scribbled out the word lesbian and all of the female pronouns, and written a note that says, I figure lesbians know the best about this stuff. Truly king shit. There's also this comic from Transposes, Cal's Story, which depicts Cal's first experience topping a cis guy. Also very entertaining and relatable. And of course, all of this stuff that I've been saying has been me speaking from my experience as a relatively binary trans guy. Many people who are more genderqueer enjoy playing with people's sexual expectations and definitions of sexuality, such as this piece from Genderfuck discussing a genderqueer person's joy in being with straight men. Queer desires. I'm amused and take pleasure in putting my prescription for an IUD in my trans folder. Me, an anti-heteronormative genderqueer, not only hoping to obtain an IUD, but putting the description with my trans stuff. Blasphemous. I usually try and keep my queer and trans politics identities unaware of the fact that I like to be penetrated, sometimes by sperm makers. Okay, there's plenty of sperm makers in my queer and trans communities, so getting an IUD hardly compromises my queer trans identities, of course, but that's not the whole story. Sometimes I want to be penetrated by straight cis men. I'm a man and I like girls, cis men. Now that is blasphemous. If I'm being fucked by straight cis men, what does that make me? Well, they'd certainly see me as a girl, otherwise you can be sure they wouldn't be fucking me. How can I be okay with that? With all my politics, my queerness, gender queerness, and my feminism? How could that possibly work? Okay, hold up. To be honest, I'm portraying myself in a certain way, the way I want to be perceived. I'm generalizing more than is possible considering my relatively limited sexual experience. I don't know for sure if I do like being fucked by straight cis men. The last 2 men I fucked were not exactly straight or cis, and I won't go more than 2 years into the past to analyze my sexuality because I know it's changed so much since then. All I have to go off is my desires and what I think about when I'm wanking. So when I think about I want to be fucked by a cis guy because no matter what I think about when I'm wanking, I often end up going back to that. And not just being penetrated, but being dominated, overpowered. I'm pretty sure that in practice, experiencing this with any random straight cis men would freak me out, because I definitely need some level of trust to feel safe. But how many straight cis men do I really trust? Not very many. So Bug said, quote, my gender awakening and my sexual awakening happened around the same time. For a while I wished I could have been born a boy so that I could be trans femme, but to be honest, it feels really good when people love my body as it is. And I do very much enjoy having a pussy and having it filled. My perception of and relationship with my body fluctuates along with my gender. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I hate it, sometimes I want to change it. But I do respect my body. It's doing its best, and it's not my body's fault that society assigns gender to the way it developed. These D-cup tits are man boobs. I also really love this piece, The Strange Adventures of Trans Fag Drag by Julianne. It says, I'm an ageless drag queen trapped inside a gay teenage boy, trapped inside a middle-aged woman. It's like being the human equivalent of those Chinese boxes that fit one inside the other. Sometimes I wonder if it could go on even further. Who's trapped inside the drag queen? Do I really want to know? What if it's something unspeakably vile, like a hat breeder yuppie lawyer? Instead of fantasy shopping trips to buy cotton button-front Calvins or a black cutout bra from Stormy Leather, will I daydream of the perfect nanny for the kids? A wide-eyed, lush-lipped, big-hipped Swede who'll let me bang her while the wife's working late at her law office? Some things are too pervy, even for me. I'm sorry. Ultimately, for many trans guys, sexuality is a negotiation with the body, a coming to reckon with it and find power and joy in it. This is a piece from Boys Will Be Boys Monthly, March 1993, discussing the invisibility of gay trans men, struggles with HIV, and remembering Lou Sullivan, and speaking about reckoning with the body. Quote, after all, our libidos are quite strong, and the testosterone is acting on the only genitals we have and making them hunger. Fucking real.
One further thought on the testosterone changes stuff was that specifically, and this is going to get very slightly lewd, I apologize, but specifically, the shift I have noticed has been that like the way someone should give me a hand job basically has changed from a more your sort of rubbing motion or whatever, with a clitoris to more of a I'm gripping a tiny dick and jacking it off. It's a very small dick. But the motion itself and what works for the equipment has changed even though there's only been like, there's been some bottom growth, but it's not like, there's not like a recognizable dick down there or anything. I don't know. I can't evaluate my own. But like it's fascinating to me that even just like the way you interact with that equipment shifts on testosterone. And it's like, yeah, it's the idea that people have that like it's gonna be like a guy's head on a girl's body or something is like not. It's a guy's body all the way down, buddy.
This story, pictured now, also reveals how we don't get relevant sexual education. We either come out of straight society or lesbian subculture and are therefore not often given HIV education and other information that's relevant to gay men, even though many of us have died of HIV, and that doesn't even begin to cover the problems that are unique to us, such as articulated in this article about gynecological information for trans men. Or, as Tom's mom puts it, usa condones, eres hombre ahora, pero todavía puedes quedar embarazada. Or even how hormones can affect our sexuality as we go through our transitions. A question that I often get from straight people is, quote, did testosterone make you sexually attracted to women? Now, that's a very stupid question. If testosterone caused men to lust after women, there would be no such thing as gay men. I don't think tea made me bisexual. It simply took an attraction that was already there, but mild, and amped it up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question that I have for you is like, is there anything in particular that you feel like you didn't receive any information about that you feel like you then had to sort of like piece together for yourself?
How my genitals work? I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Neither of my parents would tell me that shit. Sex ed would not get into that for that particular set of anatomy. So I literally just had to go onto the internet and just Google it all and learn myself. I'm not going to go into the details, but it was kind of embarrassing, the sheer amount about my own physicality that I just straight up didn't know. And I mean, it's my body. You'd think I know, right? But no. Yeah. And that was another one of those things where once you get the internet access, suddenly it's like, oh, shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess something about that I think is really interesting too, and like you're saying, like a lot of the information that you came across was intended for like cis girls. And it's like, you may or may not have similar anatomy to those individuals, but like, you might also relate to it in very different ways. And so like, that information, I could imagine, would only take you part way.
Yeah, there's one specific strip that I remember finding. Very specific one. It was in 2016, I was 20 years old. Very shortly after learning the word transgender. Now I haven't actually read like the full comic itself. I know there was a webcomic that was running for a long time that was called Oh Joy Sex Toy, and I haven't really read it, but there was one strip, and I saw it reposted on Twitter, and it was a guest comic, and the author was only known as Benjamin. I don't know, I wish I could give more credit to the author, but, and it was just a strip that was centered around two guys playing with various toys, and the interesting thing was that one of the guys was cis, and one, though they didn't say it out loud, just looking, was very presumably trans. It was the first time I'd ever seen a trans man in, like, a sexually positive light ever. Really, I think it may have been one of the first times I'd seen, like, a deliberately depicted trans man sexually ever. And it was just this one comic strip that some rando reposted on Twitter. And I remember looking at it and thinking, I could be that guy. Straight up, I could be him. All those devices he's using, that could be me. That happiness that he has with another male partner, I guess I could do that too. Well, I could be happy and a guy?
Hell yeah.
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's like that's like one of the only examples I can really think of that I've ever seen in general. And that was, what, 2016? Yeah.
Wow.
But ultimately, our sexuality is beautiful, joyful, and something that straight people could only wish that they could experience. I'm still a bit bruised, and it's still a bit puffy here. And I can't feel much in my nipples, and it feels like they might be too low. And I know it's not that much compared to your chest. It looks amazing. Damn it, you perfect little shit. How did I even get so lucky?
Sort of mentor activist that I mentioned for. He was kind of an affirmation for me. Just him existing. That, queer trans men older than me exist here in the Philippines. And I was like, so, huh. And several other people in the activism sphere that I personally know and are friends with are also queer. And their brotherhood basically has meant the world to me. Like, it means everything to me. If they're watching this, you mean the world to me. Mahal ko kayo. The younger generation, kids younger than me who are coming up on the internet too, and they are being super gay while being transgender. They inspire me every day, knowing that, guys like me will always exist across generations. That's always super affirming and nice to see.
And finally, this piece is from Genderfuck is my boyfriend, Polly is my girlfriend, by Andrea Gibson. No, I'm not gay. No, I'm not straight, and I'm sure as hell not bisexual, damn it. I am whatever I am, when I am it, loving whoever you are when the stars shine and whoever you'll be when the sun rises. Yes, I like girls. Yes, I like boys. Yes, I like boys who like boys. I like girls who wear toys and girls who don't. Girls who don't call themselves girls, crew cuts or curls, and all that really bad hair phase in between. I like steam rising from the body of a one-night stand. I like holding hands for 3 months before kissing. I like wishing your body was Saturn, my body 1,000 rings wrapped around you. You wanted to be a Buddhist nun once. Last night you held my cervix between your fingers. I thank gods I don't believe in for your changing. Tell me we'll be naming our children beautiful and nothing else. Finally, the shoutouts. My shoutouts are to the interviewees, Bug, Tommy, Sam, Lee, and Nicodemus. And thank you also to LJ for helping me with translating Hanmuji's interview at the beginning. Here are the interviewees' shoutouts. Bug's shoutout was for T the Zine, which, full disclosure, I'm also a contributor to, tthezine.itch.io.
Hey, so my personal socials, I'm a illustrator, a cartoonist, whatever. I like to make queer, trans, weirdo drawings. Well, I've been super busy with it, so I haven't posted anything you'd like to. I'm at Twitter and Instagram, Butiki na Baboy, and that will be up on the screen. The organization I vote is Trans Masculine 15. So we work a lot with other trans men. We work to provide safe space for any Filipino trans masculine people, tomboys, trans men, trans masculine non-binary included. We have a Facebook support group. We have a website that we need to update. We have a website with all of our directory for medical, psychosocial, whatever services you need to start your transition journey, or for trans-friendly services in the Philippines. We provide links to those through our networks, and maybe we'll have another workshop soon. Find out. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Trans Masculine Philippines. That's plug.
Amazing. I love it.
Because you mentioned representation. I remember one of the prompts that you sent me beforehand was asking about like socials or anything that I may want to shout out. I don't have any projects of my own that I personally want to shout out, but instead I have a webcomic recommendation in regards to trans masculine sexuality. Have you ever read a webcomic called Superpose?
I don't think so, no.
There's a webcomic called Superpose. I think it started in early 2020 by two authors. One named, according to Google, pronounced Joseph. It's like Irish. And the other one named Anka. And it is a webcomic that takes place in the 1980s. It's kind of set up and framed to look like an 80s film almost. And it stars 3 trans people, 2 of whom are trans guys specifically, working on building this fantastic machine that I think is able to like navigate time and space. But the story isn't really about the machine. It's really about these trans individuals and navigating transness, agency for the main character, Raphael specifically navigating a gay trans person of color in the 80s. It's 80s, oh my god. In a poor family, and like a lot of like the really nuanced kinds of struggles that you may experience in that intersection of, again, transphobia, homophobia, racism, just the general struggles of being an immigrant on top of it all. And that's just like one of many characters with just these incredible nuanced relationships with their gender and eventually sexuality. I don't want to spoil anything. All I'll say is, if you're really interested in a nuanced and frankly very beautiful, in my opinion, view of trans guys and sex on top of other things, definitely give Superpose a go. It's really one of the best webcomics I've ever read.
I'm on Mastodon and also most places as at inherently. That's inherent with a Lee at the end, Lee. But also mostly I just post pictures of birds and my craft projects and my fun little. I do like Linocut stamps and stuff.
I'd just like to plug my newsletter, the Seattle FTM, a newsletter inspired by Lee Sullivan's The FTM and the FTM International, FTM Magazine, most of which aren't really publicized anymore. It's a newsletter by and for trans men, trans masculine people, and our lovers, based in the Seattle area. Features amateur news articles, reviews of queer venues and events, poetry, opinion pieces, and personal ads. You can follow it on Instagram at SeattleFTM or email SeattleFTMnews@gmail.com to join the mailing list. And our website is currently hosted at ftm.seattle.carrd.co.
Thanks for watching this video all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. If you're interested in any of the sources that I linked to or any of the things that the interviewees mentioned, a full script of this video will be in the show notes, as I said before. It also contains further reading of similar resources, which I think are very cool and interesting. If you like this video, you can pay me money for it. There will be PayPal and such links below. Thanks for joining, and goodbye.